Welcome to Sleep with Myth. Close your eyes and let the world fade away. Tonight we drift beyond time, where gods dream and stories remember their light. Before flame and frost were named, there was only silence, a void vast enough to hold the weight of all beginnings. From that silence rose a sound, not a voice, but a trembling breath of existence itself. It was the first sigh of Ymir, the giant who dreamed alone in the cold womb of Ginnungagap. In that endless rift between fire and ice, the mists of creation curled and wove themselves into shape. From the south came Muspel's heat, wild, molten, alive. From the north spilled Niflheim's frost, ancient, slow, eternal. Where their edges met, the frost began to melt, and from the melting came Ymir, the first of the giants, born not from mother or father, but from the meeting of opposites. He opened eyes that had never seen light, and in their reflection, the cosmos stirred. His breath was fog. His heartbeat was thunder trapped in ice. Each movement of his vast body birthed echoes that would one day become mountains, rivers, and stars. Yet Ymir did not know he was dreaming, for in that dream he heard music, faint and far away. It was the whisper of fire within the frost, a forgotten warmth that hummed like a lullaby to the void. And so, the last song of Ymir began, long before he ever knew it would be his last. In the vast emptiness of Ginnungagap, Ymir slept, though sleep itself was a thing newly born. His dreams were long tides of thought that rolled through the darkness like waves of frozen light. Each pulse of his mind was creation unfinished, a question without an answer. Around him, frost breathed, and fire sighed. The warmth that birthed him lingered near, curling like ribbons beneath the cold surface of his skin. From that warmth came movement, the smallest flicker of life, trembling like dew on the edge of dawn. It was from Ymir's sweat that beings began to form. From his left arm came a man, and from his right, a woman, not of flesh, but of frost and breath. They stirred, shivering in the cold that was their cradle. Their eyes were like pale moons, and their voices, when they first spoke, echoed like cracking ice across the void. These were the first of the Jotnar, the frost giants. They wandered across Ymir's immense body, exploring its frozen valleys and glacial ridges. Their world contained within the dream of their sleeping creator. To them, Ymir was not a being but a mountain, a landscape of eternity. And still the giant dreamed. Beneath him, the frost deepened into caverns where the first whispers of time began to hum. There, droplets of melted ice gathered, and from those droplets, something stirred, something not born of cold, but of fire. From the heat of Muspel's distant breath came Audhumla, the cosmic cow, mother of nourishment. She was radiant and vast, her hide shimmering with frost that glowed like starlight. From her teats flowed rivers of milk, white as the first dawn, and these rivers fed Ymir as he slept. Each drop that touched his lips filled him with memory, of the warmth that had created him, of a sound he could not name, a heartbeat that was not his own. Audhumla wandered across the void, her tongue seeking sustenance upon the salt of ancient ice. And as she licked the frost-covered stone, the ice began to thin. Day after day she licked, and from beneath the layers of eternity, a face began to emerge. It was Buri, the first of the gods, the father of all that would rise from the frost. Strong and silent, his form glimmered with the light of creation's dawn. He opened his eyes and beheld Ymir, the slumbering giant, and the frost-born kin that crawled across his immense body. In the stillness, Buri understood. The dream of Ymir must end, or the world would remain a memory unawakened. But Buri did not act alone. From him would come Bor, and from Bor Odin, Vili, and Vi. The three who would become the architects of the cosmos, the weavers of form, and the bringers of order to the storm of existence. Yet before they were born, Ymir's dream deepened. He saw within his mind a fire that sang. It was not the fire that burned, but one that remembered. It whispered of warmth that could give meaning to frost, and of light that could bring shape to shadow. The fire called itself memory, the first echo of consciousness. In that dreaming state, Ymir began to understand. The void was no longer empty. It was filled with stories yet to be spoken. He could feel them, coiling around his body, forming constellations of thought and intention. Each spark was a future, each future a reflection of his breath. But creation is never without cost. For every light that flickered into being, a shadow formed beside it. From Ymir's heart came sorrow, for he sensed the end of his dreaming even as it began. The frost giants multiplied, their feet shaking the frozen ground that was his chest. They fought among themselves, for even in the beginning, there was division, warmth and cold, sound and silence, will and chaos. And from that conflict came a whisper of destiny. Ymir heard it faintly, like wind through hollow stone. You will die, and from your death, the world will live. He tried to resist the dream's command. He reached into the void, seeking to pull the frost back over the fire, to drown the light in silence once more. But the warmth persisted. It was stronger than even he. It was the heartbeat of life, and it had already chosen its path. As the mists of time thickened, Buri's bloodline awoke. From him came the three brothers, Odin, Vili, and Vi, gods of will, awareness, and spirit. They looked upon Ymir and knew that his body was both cradle and prison to all creation. If the world were to be born, his dream must shatter. The gods approached in reverent silence. They could feel the pulse of Ymir beneath their feet, deep, slow, endless. The air was thick with ancient sleep. Even light dared not intrude too harshly upon that stillness. Odin raised his hand, and from the spark of Muspel that still lingered in his veins, he drew forth fire. Vili summoned the wind, a breath to carry the flame, and Vi spoke a single word, the first true sound ever uttered, a vibration that split the silence like dawn tearing through night. The fire flared, the frost screamed, and Ymir's eyes opened. For the first time he saw, and what he saw was everything, the vast, trembling expanse of possibility. The stars unborn, the seas unwritten, the gods who would rise from his ruin. He did not cry out. Instead, he smiled. A slow, heavy smile that cracked the ice across his face. He understood now that he had been both creator and creation, dreamer and dream. And the song he had heard all along, that distant, forgotten lullaby, began to rise again, no longer faint, but full and alive. It was the last song of Ymir, and it burned like sunlight in the frost. As the gods drew close, Ymir exhaled. His breath became clouds. His blood began to stir. He whispered into the void, "Remember me not in death, but in what endures." Then Odin struck. The fire, the wind, and the word, all at once, met Ymir's heart. The frost shattered into 1,000 shining shards, scattering across the cosmos like tears of creation. Each fragment fell into the void, carrying within it a spark of his dream. And from that scattering the world began. His blood became rivers and seas. His bones became mountains. His hair became forests. His skull the dome of the heavens. And from the fire that once whispered to him, the sun and moon were born. But the echo of his song remained. Deep beneath the roots of the new world, where no light could reach, it pulsed like an ember, the memory of the first warmth. Those who listen closely to the northern winds say they can still hear it. The soft hum beneath the crack of ice, the melody that lingers where fire and frost meet. It is the breath of Ymir, dreaming still, waiting for the moment when creation will turn once more toward the silence from which it came. And in that silence, the last song will be heard again, as the beginning of all things, and the end of them too. The first thunder after Ymir fell was not a sound but a settling. Across the newborn distances, the frost of his silence met the warmth of his surrender and learned a new word, river. From his great body, the blood poured, red and bright as a second dawn, and all the void that had known only stillness discovered the promise of flow. Odin stood knee-deep in that tide with Vili at his right and Ve at his left. They were quiet because quiet was proper when one world ends to give another a chance. The brothers watched as the blood traced lines through darkness, curling into deltas and inlets, gathering in hollows that would become seas. Where it pooled around Ymir's shattered ribs, it found rhythm and named itself ocean. "Let it not drown what he dreamed," Vili murmured. "It must drown what must not return," said Ve, and his breath turned to wind that pushed the waters into their beds. Odin bent and dipped a hand into the flood. Warmth held within chill, like a coal in snow. He closed his fist and the water trembled, remembering both the fire that woke it and the ice that held it. "This is the blood of the sky," he said at last. "It will fall and rise and teach all things the habit of coming back." They set to work, not as butchers, but as keepers of a wake. From bones they raised ranges, long spines of mountains whose vertebrae shone with trapped dawn. From teeth they cast cliffs that bit the horizon, white with the memory of biting cold. His hair they planted as forests, each strand becoming a pine that learned to hum when the wind braided through it. They stretched his vast, pale skin into plains where the future animals would walk like moving shadows of clouds. Yet the world had no compass. It was a bowl without a rim. So the brothers lifted Ymir's skull and, fearing to let it fall, carried it together. They arched it overhead, and the inward curve of it rang like a bell across creation. The sound struck sparks from Vili's breath and Ve's word. Each spark rose and lingered. Odin caught them with a glance and fixed them in place, and thus the first stars took their patient posts. Still the dome sagged with the weight of everything it once contained: darkness, dream, and 1,000 unborn midnights. For small beings, new and old at once, stepped from the edges where bone met sky. They bowed without being taught to bow. "Name us," they said, "and we will hold." Odin touched each brow. "You Nordri bear the north. You Sudri the south. You Austri the east. You Vestri the west." They climbed to their stations and set their shoulders beneath the sky. It rose a little, and the first horizon learned to be a circle. But the new heavens were empty of a day. In the black curve of the skull there still wandered embers from Muspel, faithful to their old heat. Odin called to them, and one answered fierce and bright. "Be sun," he said gently, as if asking rather than commanding. The ember flared, remembering 1,000 futures at once. He set the sun upon a path, slow enough to be trusted, sure enough to be awaited. Another spark, humbler but no less faithful, drifted near. "Be moon," Vili breathed, and the moon nodded, learning the art of taking light in order to give it back. Stars, shy witnesses, stepped closer. A host of them, small fires content with small duties, sprinkled themselves across the roof of the world. They would keep accounts of nights, stitch sailors to their courses, and teach the first listeners that patience has a shape. From Ymir's eyelashes the brothers built a fence, broad-stalked and bristling, to keep the salt hunger of the seas from swallowing the soft earth. They named this circle Midgard, middle enclosure, and breathed upon it so that seed would dare the dark and tell green stories above ground. The flood, though, had not forgotten its own beginning. It lapped at the edges and tested the bars of the new-made world. Wherever it jumped the fence, Odin's shadow cooled it into lakes. Where it sulked, V's voice widened it into rivers that learned how to sing. There are births that happen all at once and births that happen slowly, the way mountains kneel to become sand. Creation is both. By the seventh long breath of the gods, storms rose from the ocean's mind and returned to it as rain. The rain struck rock and became humility. It learned to wait in the bellies of caverns until the world was thirsty enough to call it out again. Thus began the law Odin tasted when he held the flood. All things leave, all things return. But the new land still remembered a giant's sleep. In its low places you could hear a hum, not wind, not water, something between. It was Ymir's last song, traveling through stone, asking not to be lost. Odin knelt with his ear to the ground and heard within that hum a grammar older than the first word. He listened until he could not tell his heartbeat from the echo. "Keep it," he told the earth. "Let root and ore and the long bones of hills remember." Where Ymir's shattered heart had touched stone, a geyser of warmth pressed upward. It met the newborn rain and wrapped itself in steam. "Here," said Vili, eyes soft with a future only he could see. "Creatures will learn that breath is the river inside." V nodded and added a small word that meant home. The steam became cloud and went looking for the sun's attention. Not all that fell from Ymir's undoing was quiet. From hollows cut deep by his blood, creatures crawled. The first worms and blind eels, pale as unlit hours. They wriggled without names and so did not know their hunger from their purpose. Odin's glance gave them measure. Vili's wind gave them direction. V's word gave them end. They became food for the next daring forms that would rise from the mixture of warmth and patience. The brothers walked the newborn beaches where foam rehearsed how to be lace. They spoke seldom. When they did, they named. "That cliff is a promise," said V, "because it holds though waves plead with it day and night." "That valley is a memory," said Vili, "because it keeps shadows without being bitter." "This river is counsel," said Odin, "because it goes around what will not move and still finds the sea." Each name bound a lesson to a place, and thus the world began to educate itself. Yet balance is not won once. It is a craft that must be practiced before the ink dries. Where the sun and moon first learned their routes, two wolves came from the far north, shadows with teeth. They ran the edges of light, not to swallow but to hasten. At times they were too eager and bit at the rims of day and night, and the world dimmed. From that dimming, mortals not yet made would one day weave stories of pursuit and eclipse. Odin let the wolves run. "Let fear be a teacher," he said, "but never a king." The gods looked upon their work and felt it looking back. This is the moment when a maker becomes a steward. They raised high seats upon a quiet ridge and watched storm lines practice their handwriting on the far-out sea. On the eighth breath of the world, a wind from Niflheim wandered south, found the warmth rising from new deserts, and became rain again. Proof that even enemies can invent a third thing together. V dreamed a road in the air for messengers. He saw a bridge that would someday blaze with the colors of vows kept. "Not yet," Odin told him, smiling, "but remember it. One day we will set it from here to where we meet those who honor us." And V kept the secret of the bridge that would be called Bifrost, saving its shine for a later telling. From Ymir's brain, thin fog rose and never fully chose whether to remain water or sky. It learned to hover at meadow height, to soften the sun when fields were tired, to give single trees the dignity of islands. Travelers not yet born would take courage from it, knowing that even the air could be a veil when gentleness was needed. But in the deep places the first grudges gathered. Not all the Jotnar accepted the new order. From beyond the fence of Midgard, in the blue distance of Jotunheim, they lifted their voices and asked whether a world made from a body could ever be anything but a wound. The question stung Odin because it was not without wisdom. "We must answer with how we keep it," he said to his brothers. "Let our rule be mending." The dwarfs, born from the quickened maggots that had fed upon Ymir's flesh, woke under mountains with the impatient gift of hands. They quarried or from the giant's ribs and taught it to be song. They hammered runes into the roots of cliffs so that thunder would remember to count before it spoke. To them Odin offered craft. In return they offered tools that knew their owners' names. Among those tools a handful of small mirrors would later be set in the sky to steady the moon when wolves tired it with their chase. The days began to braid themselves into a calendar. Sun took the long road and leaned his light upon earth until grass invented patience. Moon came gentler and taught oceans to breathe in and out like sleeping beasts. Between them, stars stitched night into something worth walking under. Seasons rehearsed their parts. The fat laughter of summer, the austere kindness of winter, the long explanations of autumn and spring. And yet Odin felt it, a silence at the center. They had carved bowl and poured river. They had laced heaven with beasts of light and given the winds their alphabets. But the world did not yet have a witness who could answer back. Fire remembers itself, he said. Ice remembers itself. Who will remember both and call that knowledge soul? They wandered the shoreline where driftwood gathered, dead trees delivered by the sea like letters saved from a burning house. Two trunks lay side by side, salt-brined and ordinary. Vili stopped. These, he said, want to stand. V touched their grain and felt a question in it. Odin breathed, long and slow, until the breath slid into the wood and learned to stay. He set his palm on each trunk and heard two faint drumbeats answer. We are not ready to name them, Odin decided. Not yet. First, teach them to listen. So the brothers left the trunks upon the sand and spoke lessons over them the way rain speaks to thirsty soil. Vili gave them will, the chance to choose the hard road for the right reason. V gave them voice, a thread strong enough to pull a thought from silence and lay it where another could see. Odin gave them life, the candle that does not end but passes itself on with a kiss of fire. The trunks shivered. They were still wood and already more. What will they remember? V asked softly. Odin looked across the sea where a storm was building out of habit and compassion. Everything, he said, and because they will remember everything, they must learn to put their hands between cruelty and what cannot defend itself. He set a boundary in his heart that would one day be called law. Not the law that cages, but the law that keeps the bridge from collapsing under too much praise. Above them, sun paused as if curious. Moon leaned closer and made a path of silver along the water so that the night could walk to meet them. The dwarfs below hammered a rhythm that matched two small new pulses in the driftwood on the beach. Far away in Jotunheim, a shadow smiled and began to sharpen itself into a question the gods would not like. Balance always attracts its test. The brothers returned to the high seats and watched the newborn world practice being itself. Rain rehearsed mercy. Lightning rehearsed remorse. Mountains practiced patience with the ambition of roots. Rivers memorized the art of leaving without forgetting where they came from. Odin closed his eyes and listened for the hum in the stone. The last song of Ymir moving like blood through the veins of cliffs and caves. May we never forget, he prayed without words, that we built from a gift. The wind carried that unsaid prayer across Midgard, and where it passed, seeds dared to split, to trust the dark with their small green futures. Night deepened. The wolves ran and did not catch what they chased. Nordri, Sudri, Austri, Vestri bore the dome without complaint. The stars kept their books. And down on the sand, two trunks of driftwood waited to be more than witness. The world breathed, and in that breath, the blood of the sky rose as mist, fell as rain, returned as river, became sea again, the old promise in a new circle, while somewhere in the stone, an ancient giant finished the verse he had begun at the beginning. The last notes went out across the distances like birds that knew the way home. Welcome to sleep with myth. Close your eyes and let the world fade away. Tonight we drift beyond time, where gods dream and stories remember their light. When the song of Ymir faded into the marrow of the world, silence spread across creation. It was not an empty silence, but a deep, breathing stillness, like the pause between heartbeats when the universe listens to itself. The rivers, born of his blood, whispered through the cracks of the new earth. The bones of the giant became mountains, rising from the mist like frozen thoughts of eternity. And in the hollows where his breath once lingered, the first winds began to move, soft, curious, searching. The gods watched. Odin, his one eye reflecting both flame and frost, stood at the edge of the new world and spoke in a low voice that trembled like thunder buried under snow. From his end we are beginning. Let this silence become memory. Beside him, Vili and Vi closed their hands around the air. They could feel it, the faint, trembling pulse beneath stone and river. It was the heartbeat of a world learning to breathe. The sky still glowed with the embers of Muspelheim and the shards of ice from Niflheim. Every gust of wind carried the scent of fire and salt, of birth and decay. In that trembling air, the gods shaped the first trees. They took roots from Ymir's veins, leaves from his last dream, and planted them where the rivers met. The ground shivered, and a sound like the first sigh escaped the soil. From that breath mist rose, and from the mist came voices. Not words, not yet, but tones, fragments of longing, echoes that would someday become language. Vili said, "They remember him." Odin nodded. "Then they will remember us." For even in the breath of the earth, Ymir's memory lived on. His song had not died. It had only turned inward, becoming the rhythm of all things. When the rivers flowed, they sang his lament. When the mountains cracked beneath the weight of stars, they spoke his name. And when the dawn touched the horizon, the light shimmered like the pulse of his sleeping heart. The gods walked across the land that had once been the body of the first being. Each step awakened something ancient. Where Odin's foot fell, time began. Where Vili's hand brushed the air, color bloomed. Where V's voice lingered, meaning took root. They did not know yet what they were making. They only felt that the silence was heavy, too vast to remain unshaped. And so they began to carve the unseen. They drew invisible lines in the air, borders between shadow and flame, between dream and waking. And from those lines came rhythm, the cycle of day and night, the balance between motion and rest. "This," said Vi, "is the measure of existence, to move and to pause." But Odin only looked toward the north, where a wind older than creation still howled. "There is still a breath missing," he said. "Something that can carry our memory forward when we sleep." He knelt, and from the mud at the river's edge, he shaped two figures. One was molded from the quiet side of Ymir's heart, soft, trembling, and gentle. The other was sculpted from the spark that had fallen from Muspelheim, bright, curious, and restless. They were still, without form of thought. No warmth stirred in them, until Vili whispered, "Let them feel," and touched their chests. And Vi said, "Let them speak," and brushed their lips. Then Odin bent low and breathed, a long, slow breath that filled the air with the scent of fire and ice. The figures trembled. Eyes opened. The first humans looked upon the world, and the world looked back. They stood beneath the bones of the sky, wrapped in mist, unsure. They did not know hunger or fear, only wonder. The gods watched them with quiet awe. From these fragile beings would come stories, and through stories the gods themselves would endure. "Let them dream," Odin said, "so they may remember even what they have never seen." He placed in their minds the fragments of Ymir's last song, the rhythm of becoming, the ache of loss, the whisper of flame beneath ice. The humans listened. Though they did not yet understand, they felt it, a longing as old as the void. When they looked at the mountains, they felt the slow breath of stone. When they touched the water, they heard a low hum, the voice of the sleeping fire beneath the world. They began to move through the land, naming the things they saw, though their language was only breath and tone. And the gods smiled, for they heard themselves in that sound. That night, when the first darkness fell across the sky, the stars awakened, sparks of fire trapped in Ymir's skull. They blinked, remembering the light that had once danced before creation. And as they shone, they breathed warmth into the mountains, until even stone seemed to pulse. The mountains inhaled, the rivers sighed, and deep beneath the soil, the last of Ymir's dreams stirred once more. He was not gone. He had become the memory that holds the world together. When the wind moves through valleys, it is his breath. When thunder rolls across the horizon, it is his voice. And when fire flickers in the heart of man, it is his song remembering itself. The gods gathered upon the highest peak, their faces lit by the starlight that shimmered like molten gold on snow. Odin spoke. "The song of the first has ended, but its echo shall never fade. In each flame, in each drop of water, in each heart that dares to dream, Ymir lives." Vili and Vi bowed their heads. The silence that followed was vast, but no longer empty. It was full with promise, with remembrance, with the steady breath of a world awake at last. The mountains exhaled mist. The rivers shimmered with reflected stars. And somewhere in the stillness between heartbeats, the universe smiled, for it too had learned to breathe. The dawn came softly, not in flame or thunder, but as a breath exhaled by the mountains themselves. It carried with it a warmth that did not burn, a memory of fire rather than fire itself. The snow that veiled the peaks began to shimmer, melting not into water, but into light, soft, golden, and trembling with something that felt like sorrow. The gods stood upon the ridge where the air still sang with Ymir's echo. They could not tell if what they heard was the voice of the past, or the world itself learning to speak again. Odin raised his hand, and the winds stilled. What remained was the heartbeat, slow, vast, eternal. The same rhythm that once pulsed in Ymir's chest. "The fire beneath the ice still dreams," Odin whispered. "It has not gone. It only sleeps, as we all must until the next dawn." Vili looked to the sky, where smoke rose like prayer. Vi closed his eyes, listening to the hum beneath the earth. In that hum was the secret of the world, a music that no god could fully command. Far below, in the valleys born of Ymir's bones, humanity walked for the first time beneath a sky that shimmered like liquid gold. They built no temples, no monuments, no walls. They simply stood and breathed. For in that breath, they felt what the gods had given them: memory, warmth, and the fragile beauty of awareness. They looked upon flame and water and did not see opposites, but reflections, one remembering the other. Among them an elder spoke, though none knew from where his wisdom came. He said, "The world does not end when it sleeps. It only dreams a different dream." His words carried through the wind and reached the gods, and Odin smiled, for he recognized his own thought returning to him, reshaped by mortal lips. "This," Odin said, "is why we breathed life into clay. They will remember what we forget." As night fell, the first stars flared, embers of Muspelheim caught in the black tapestry of Ymir's skull. Air light fell upon the earth like blessings, and wherever it touched, the soil grew warm, and the rivers whispered louder. Deep within the roots of the mountains, the last spark of Ymir's fire stirred. It dreamed of oceans yet unmade, of forests still folded in the dark, of songs that would one day rise from mortal throats. The dream reached Odin in his sleep, and he saw the world as it might become. Rivers glowing with moonlight, children laughing beneath the aurora, and the flame of creation burning gently in every living heart. When he awoke, he said to Vili and Vi, "The world is awake, yet it dreams still. And perhaps that is what it means to live, to burn quietly without end." In those days, the gods wandered through the newborn lands. They taught humankind to name the stars, to weave cloth from wind and light, to see in silence the reflection of eternity. But Ymir's shadow lingered still, for creation does not erase its source, it remembers. Every gust of snow carried a faint chill of his memory, every flame a trace of his last breath. And when thunder broke across the horizon, Odin would pause and listen. Sometimes he thought he heard a voice, deep, mournful, vast, the echo of the one who had sung the world awake. Then came a night when the stars dimmed, and the wind carried no sound. The gods looked upon one another, and in that silence, even they felt the weight of ending. Odin climbed the highest peak, his cloak heavy with frost and memory. He looked out upon the frozen rivers, the breathing mountains, the sleeping forests glowing faintly with the warmth of unseen embers. He spoke into the void, "Ymir, if you yet listen, know this, your fire has not perished. It burns now in all who dream. It is the pulse of the mortal heart, the spark that defies forgetting. In your death, you became the memory that sustains the world." The wind shifted, and for a moment, the snow did not fall. It hovered, each flake glowing from within, as though listening. Then came a sound, faint, resonant, endless. A hum that wove through the air, through the earth, through the gods themselves. It was not thunder. It was breath. The breath of a being who had never truly died, but had become the silence that gives meaning to sound. Vili fell to his knees. Vi bowed his head, and Odin closed his eye, feeling warmth on his face, as if the sun had risen within him. The dawn that followed was unlike any before. The sky shimmered with two colors, the pale blue of ice and the deep gold of fire, woven together like a tapestry of memory. The mountains glowed faintly from within, their veins pulsing with molten light. The rivers steamed, singing softly as they wound through valleys. And the first flowers pushed through the frost, their petals reflecting both dawn and dusk. The gods stood together and saw that the world no longer belonged to them alone. It belonged to everything that remembered: the stones, the water, the flame within each soul. Odin spoke softly. Ymir is gone, and yet he is here. He is the echo in the flame, the dream in the ice, the silence that listens between heartbeats. He looked toward humanity below, watching them gather around small fires, their faces painted in orange light and shadow. He smiled. They carry the fire now, he said. They will forget us one day, but the warmth will remain. That night the gods did not speak. They watched the stars, feeling the rhythm of creation move beneath them. In the quiet, the earth breathed, and somewhere, far beneath the ice, a spark glowed once more. Steady, eternal, patient. The flame that remembers never truly dies. It only sleeps, and in its sleep it dreams of dawns yet to come, of songs not yet sung, of worlds waiting to awaken. And so, in the hush of eternity, the fire beneath the ashes began to hum again, the soft, unending song of all that was, and all that ever will be. Welcome to sleep with myth. Close your eyes and let the world fade away. Tonight we drift beyond endings, where even silence remembers the fire that once sang. The world had grown quiet, not in the way of death, but in the way of rest. The air was still, the seas unmoving, and the stars, once wild and restless, hung in perfect harmony, like golden eyes half closed in sleep. The gods walked no longer among mortals. Their temples had faded into the mountains. Their voices lingered only in dreams. But the world itself still pulsed with their memory, a rhythm older than breath, softer than the light of dawn. In that silence there was no fear, only remembrance, the slow exhale of an ancient being who had chosen peace over power. Beneath the glaciers of the far north, where the sky met the breath of eternity, something vast stirred. Not awake, not asleep, but aware. Ymir. His name had long vanished from mortal tongues, but his song lived in every spark that defied the dark. The rivers hummed it beneath their frozen skins, and the wind carried its rhythm to the sleeping earth. The fire that once consumed creation was now the quiet warmth that sustained it. And the gods, scattered, eternal and dreaming, listened to the echo that had birthed them all. Odin stood upon the shore of a mirror-still sea. He was older now. His beard touched the wind like a whisper of snow. Behind him, the world shimmered with faint light, each spark a memory, each star a sigh. He looked upon the horizon and spoke softly, as if afraid to disturb the stillness. The silence endures because it remembers. He bent down, touching the sand, and the grains glowed faintly, warm beneath his hand. Even the ashes carry the dream, he said. He closed his eye, and within that darkness, he saw it. A single ember, sleeping beneath the roots of the world. Its glow was faint, but its pulse was steady. The last breath of Ymir, dreaming of tomorrow. Odin smiled. He understood now that no creation is lost. It merely changes form. The fire becomes the seed, the song becomes the silence, and the silence becomes the next dawn. Far beyond, in the mortal realm, a child sat by a dying campfire. Snow fell softly around her, and she whispered stories to the flames. Stories of gods she had never seen, and a giant whose body became the sky. Her words were fragments, echoes of myths older than memory, but they stirred something beneath the earth. The flame flickered, and the air grew warm. For a moment, it seemed the fire itself was listening. Then, softly, the wind joined her voice, a harmony born of breath and ember. And somewhere beyond time, Odin opened his eye. The gods turned their heads. The world, ancient, infinite, waiting, listened. The silence was not the end. It was the breath between songs. Ymir's dream deepened. He saw creation reborn, oceans of molten silver, skies woven of aurora, and stars rising from the ashes of old suns. And in every spark he felt the same pulse, the rhythm of what had been and what would always return. It was not life. It was not death. It was memory, the eternal heartbeat that makes all things possible. When the last of the night gave way to dawn, the light did not rise. It unfolded. It came from within the earth, spreading like a slow awakening through every stone, every ocean, every breath. And for the first time since creation began, the silence sang. It was not a song of triumph or sorrow, but of balance. It told of flame that chose stillness, of ice that learned to dream, of gods who faded into legend, and mortals who carried their warmth forward. The song spread through the heavens, soft, endless, whole. And the stars, the children of Ymir's last breath, glowed brighter. Odin stood one last time beneath the sky. He whispered, "The fire that remembers has found peace." He set his spear beside him, closed his eye, and breathed out, slow, calm, infinite. The breath rose into the air, becoming mist, then light, then a single spark, which drifted upward and vanished among the stars. The gods were gone, the world was quiet, and in that quiet Ymir smiled. The flame beneath the ashes slept once more. But even in sleep, it dreamed of new beginnings, of songs yet to be sung, of eyes that would open beneath another dawn. And so the cycle continued, not in fire, not in ice, but in silence, the silence that remembers. Thank you for listening to Sleep with Myth.